Three things you can rely on in life: death, taxes, and John McMullen at 4 on the Sports Bash. 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles and NFL Insider joins us each day at 4 to talk Eagles and the NFL. Some interesting news coming out around the NFL today. Also, Eagles are reporting today. They'll be back on the field officially tomorrow. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen on Twitter. And check out all of his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com as John joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Josh Hennig, Hunter Brody filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash today. John, how are you doing on this Hump Day Wednesday?
Doing well, enjoying my last moments of freedom before what everyone else is excited for.
Well, John, I do have a handful of things I did want to hit on with you specifically today. And I wanted to start with the news that came out of nowhere this morning of the Mike Daniels being cut by the Packers. And I kind of want to lump it together with the other news that came out. You know, Allen Hurns got cut by the Cowboys. Now Mike Daniels. And you have a handful of players who are, pretty big names around the league, guys who a lot of people assumed were going to be part of their team's success, like Mason Foster with the Redskins, who are no longer there. Do you have an explanation for why these teams have cut these guys so close to the start of camp?
Well, I can't explain that part of it. I mean, in the case of Mike Daniels, it simply was going to make a lot of money, and they understand they're going to have to pay Kenny Clark very soon, who's going to get a significant extension. And it was sort of a budget thing, more so for the future than anything else. But the timing of it, the timing of it's awful. And you're clearly, I don't want to say spite necessarily because I'm not in Green Bay, but it certainly looks like that from the outside looking in. I mean, you do have this 6-week dead period. It's not like they woke up today and said, you know what, we're going to have to pay Ken Clark. They knew that.
Right.
So if they were uncomfortable with the $8.3 million of Mike Daniels, you got to you should make that decision beforehand and at least give him some opportunity. So it does make, and even Joe Banner tweeted this today, it makes the league and organizations look bad because they do, at least from the outside, look kind of spiteful when they do some things like this on the eve of training camp because you limit the possibilities. Now, he's such a good player. I don't think he's going to have any issues. I think he's going to have multiple suitors. But nonetheless, it's still difficult. It's not the same as free agency when teams don't have full 90-man rosters. So now people are just going to look at it and say, wow, there's a really good player on the street. It's a heck of a lot better than what we have. And then you have the dominoes in other cities as well to bring in a good player because he can still help people even though he had a foot injury. He was set to go for the start of training camp. And as I said, he had been their best defensive lineman for years. Now he's aging. And again, the big price tag, but he's still a good player.
Yeah, and Jay Gruden said to the media today, there's no good time to release a player like Mason Foster. But we feel good about the youth we have a linebacker. John, I feel like, like you were just saying, these organizations, for as experienced as they are, it's not like the Packers and the Redskins have, rookie guys in the front office. It just feels like it was kind of unprofessional to do it the way they did.
Yeah, and if you look at Washington specifically in that one, I mean, it's even more. Jeff Mosher and I talked about that a little yesterday. The fact that, okay, maybe if Reuben Foster didn't tear his ACL, you could better understand it, but he's not going to be around. Mm-hmm. They do have significant talent at outside linebacker. And if they were that excited about inside linebacker, again, what did they get excited overnight? They knew this from the off season. So why do you wait that long? It's the only thing I can think of is they don't want them to go to somebody in the division. But if somebody wants a player, salary cap doesn't matter. Who you have on the roster doesn't matter. I mean, you're going to make room if you want that player. So I do think comes off as a little spiteful.
John, one more NFL topic I wanted to get with you before we hit on the Eagles specifically. This Taylor Lewan story to me is fascinating. For those who didn't hear, so Adam Schefter is reporting that Taylor Lewan is expected to be suspended for the first 4 games of the season, but the NFL is still waiting for his B sample to come back. Well, Taylor Lewan apparently has brought all of his supplements to an independent anti-doping clinic to test all of his supplements, and he says he's going to take a polygraph to prove that he's clean. I mean, this is one of the more bizarre circumstances around a suspension that I can remember, John.
Yeah, I mean, and that's from Taylor's perspective. If you saw the video, he seemed pretty broken up, and he doesn't want to be labeled a cheater, as so many people do. And you and I have talked about that past with the supplement industry. It's unregulated largely, and there's stuff in there that sometimes it's not on the label, and it ends up being in there, and you're responsible for what you put in your body, and that's the NFL policy. It hasn't changed. Taylor knows the B sample's coming back like the A sample. I mean, that's not going to change anything. And if he does prove there's a tainted supplement, it was unknowing, he's still getting suspended. So to me, it's just him trying to make outside people understand that he didn't do this purposefully, because as we all know, when you hear somebody suspended for PEDs, most people just assume they're doing it on purpose, and occasionally they're not. So it really has more to do with the history of sports in general, in that so many people have done those types of things purposefully, and if you haven't, you feel bad to be mixed in with that other group, but it's not going to affect the suspension. It just isn't.
Yeah, John, I think the other problem for Taylor is, and Hunter and I talked about this earlier, and look, I'm not going to be the guy to per se judge somebody based on what they take, because everybody's different, but you know, John, the typical guy who hits the gym and is all into the supplements, he's probably taking about 8 to 10 supplements, right? Taylor Lewan said he's taking 28 supplements to this anti-doping clinic. I mean, that's just extreme, John. I mean, who in their right mind is taking 28 different things as any level of anything?
Well, and again, you could that's at some point, as those numbers go up, it's more likely that you're going to find.
Right, you're going to have at least one of them to be popped for.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this stuff is not, it's not like you have to do a lot of digging. It's out there. People know it's unregulated. People know there's been a history of problems in the past. There's that sports council that does test certain supplements, and they will put a seal on it. But last time I checked into it, and this isn't a long time ago, maybe a year or two ago, it was 1%. That's how many supplements they got to, 1% of what's out there. So it's unlikely that those 28 supplements have been tested by any independent organization or laboratory. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going to use that many, you're going to get popped eventually, because that's what that industry is. And, you know, people talk about how can the NFL combat this. They can't. The NFL is a $15 billion industry. The supplement industry is a $50 billion industry. So they dwarf the NFL. The NFL can't do anything about it.
John McMullen joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Says every day on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill on a Wednesday. John, let's flip it to the Eagles. And I wanted to first start with the question that was given to you on Twitter that, you know, I mentioned we talk about today at Football at 4. We had a person tweet at you, and we always appreciate our listeners contacting us about Malcolm Jenkins and about if he's going to report today, which, you know, you pretty much, you know, downplayed wherever this came from. And John, I feel like, you know, am I wrong in saying this, but I don't ever remember you or Jeff Mosher or anybody who covers the Eagles ever suggesting or believing that Malcolm wouldn't be at camp. So where did this idea come from that Malcolm wouldn't be showing up this week?
Well, I don't know. I can't say that. But since that tweet, I've already confirmed he is at the NovaCare complex, so there is no concern. He was in D.C. yesterday doing an event with Michelle Obama. But when he showed up in minicamp, I think it goes back to that. If you remember, I think it was Adam Schefter who tweeted, "It's not expected to be at minicamp." And he did show at minicamp, which was the mandatory work. And then we got to talk to him, and he said, yes, I'm going to be at training camp. He had talked to Jeffrey Lurie. He'd worked some things out. There were some assurances made. We don't know what they were yet or when they will take effect or come into effect. But he confirmed at that point he would be at training camp, and he's here, and he's going to be at training camp. So that shouldn't be a concern if people are concerned.
Do you think that people sometimes misunderstand, whether it's fans or the general population, they misunderstand the business side of the game in that, a player might want a new contract, but it doesn't always equal holdout?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves is people holdouts. They'll say someone's holding out during voluntary work in off season. Before minicamp, which is actually mandatory. You can't hold out of voluntary work. Now, we all know it's a wink-wink kind of thing. Coaches want you there. Organizations want you there. But by definition, it's certainly not a holdout, nor is if you're, say, a rookie who hasn't signed his contract. The only time it's a holdout is when you have a binding contract and you don't show up for mandatory work. And that was a possibility for Malcolm back in the spring. And that's what Adam tweeted and Adam said. But he didn't. He showed up, and he's going to show up for training camp. And as I said, he mentioned that he got to speak to Jeffrey Lurie directly. So that made him feel comfortable about the issues he had with outperforming his contract. And look, something's going to happen eventually. Some kind of tweak. The Eagles might not want to set a precedent because it's still too early. And Jeffrey might have said, nudge, nudge, we're going to take care of you. And they trust enough. It could be as simple as that. But, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of minutia when it comes to pro sports and contracts. So to a certain degree, I don't expect fans to be completely up to date on the intricacies, and that's understandable. But, yeah, sometimes it gets complicated.
John, what does it say about the Eagles also? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there's been any Eagle that has held out of training camp in the Doug Peterson era. So, and if there is, I don't remember it, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that a sign of how well run the Eagles organization is and the kind of players they have? They don't have all these guys holding out each and every year like some other teams do?
Yeah, I think, part of that has to do with success as well. And we talked about that on the show a little bit, and that winning cures a lot of ills. So that's part of it. I mean, there have been issues with voluntary work. Brandon Graham a couple of years ago when Vinny was still here and before he left for Tampa and then came back, he was getting paid more than Brandon. He didn't show up for voluntary work, if you remember that. But again, it's voluntary. It's not a holdout. But he was sending a message. And that's what Malcolm was doing. Fletcher's done it in the past before he got his big deal. You miss voluntary work, and that's an indication to the team that says, look, I'm pretty important. I'm outperforming. Can I get a bump? That's essentially what it means. But everybody has shown up for mandatory work over the years, and yeah, that speaks to the strength of the organization. I think that's a fair assessment.
John, also ahead of tomorrow's training camp, I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about a lot of different things, but I think one of them has to do with the running back situation. And I wanted to get a little more perspective from you because, with Darren Sproles signing his contract, I think most of us would assume that the three guys who are on the team, no matter what, moving into the season are going to be Jordan Howard, Darren Sproles, and I assume Corey Clement. So, how do you break out the rest of the guys competing? I know that you put on your Twitter at JF McMullen your pre-training camp projections for the running back position, and I think some people would be surprised to see that you had Josh Adams making it.
Yeah, I think that was one of my surprises, and the other one would have been Sua Opeta, who's an undrafted rookie offensive lineman. I think people forget what Josh was able to accomplish before he got hurt last year. He had taken over the lead back spot. And you also have to think not only about 2019, about 2020, and the reality that Jordan Howard's on a contract year, and you probably are going to need a cost-effective two-down runner, and that's what Josh can be. And then the second part of it is people don't realize he was hurt when he got sat. It wasn't about a lack of performance. He had shoulder surgery, and it was pretty significant. So I think that was kind of brushed under the rug as well. But it is a mix. I mean, I would say you mentioned the three names being Darren, Jordan Howard, and Corey Clement. The three names are really Jordan Howard, Miles Sanders, and Darren Sproles. Even Corey Clement. Corey's not guaranteed to make this team. Now, I think he's likely to make it. But, yeah, there's a lot of bodies at the back end. And now that Darren's back, it's made it a little bit more difficult for that group. So it's kind of pick your flavor. The reason I put Adams on there is that I think the Eagles will be looking at 2020 and realize, you know what, Jordan Howard's probably not going to be here, and we need that two down back. And who's the best projection on our roster to be that? And it will be Josh Adams.
Yeah, and before Josh Adams got injured in college, some people may not know this, but he was a top college running back prospect at Notre Dame. He was a very talented runner, but when you get injured before you get drafted, it affects your stock. So I think for some people, maybe they overlook at times what Josh Adams brings to the team, not just short term but long term.
Yeah, and Corey has that as well. I mean, Corey was very successful at Wisconsin in college as well, and had some issues. And all of a sudden you get that label of undrafted free agent pinned on you forever. And you're right. I mean, Josh Adams was, for half a season, he was arguably the leading candidate to be the Heisman Trophy winner. That's how successful he was until he got banged up. And then all of a sudden the dominoes start to fall. So it's not like he doesn't have talent. And again, he was the lead back of this team for a significant portion of last season until he hurt his shoulder. And I think people are writing him off a little bit too quickly. Now, health is a legitimate concern because you mentioned his issues in college. He's had issues here. So you do have to worry about, can he stay healthy? He does tend to run a little bit too high, doesn't get his pads low enough, and maybe that's the reason he gets banged up. But I'll tell you what, he can run the football when you give him an opportunity, and that's impressive when you're a running back.
Also, at JF McMullen on Twitter, some of your other mentions, you have 5 linebackers in your projection making it. Nigel Bradham, Zach Brown, Kamu Grugier-Hill, Nate Gary, who I know Mike Gill can't stand, and the underrated LJ Fort from the Steelers. I think I want to know from you, John, we mentioned Wisconsin. Where do the cards lie for former Wisconsin linebacker TJ Edwards? Because I think, that's a guy who was a very productive linebacker in college, and there's a part of me that would like to see him make it in the NFL and even with the Eagles.
Yeah, I think he's going to be here. I think he's going to be on the practice squad. So I do think they'll be able to get him through waivers, and you won't have to worry about him leaving the organization. But I also think you have to look at that position. And, if anything, the Eagles are going away from playing linebackers. And the fact that at times there's only one on the field. And at most, for 70% of plays, there's going to be 2 on the field. So it limits those numbers. And when you have depth at other positions, you're not going to keep a linebacker around the back end of the roster is not going to be impactful, not going to play, and really not have an opportunity to play unless there's multiple injuries. So I think that's the biggest problem for the back end linebackers more than anything else. The position is changing. It's been devalued, and only 2 are going to play significant snaps. So you don't have to keep 6 anymore.
Again, it's at JF McMullen on Twitter for all your Eagles and NFL news and updates. And, John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the odds you set for the early Mr. Novacare guys. You have Markin, is that Michael or Michelle at 3-1?
No, that is Sony's brother.
Sony Michel's brother, okay.
Yeah. And he was pretty impressive. He's a receiver, was really a star in the CFL. And he was pretty good in the spring. Can do a lot of things. He's very quick. Really stood out as a slot receiver. Can also be a punt returner. That's not going to be as important now that Darren Sproles is back. But he's the kind of guy who's very quick and is going to wow some fans at training camp. So I think you're going to hear that name.
I'm surprised you don't have Joe Osman at higher odds than 10-1, though.
Well, the issue is his position. You know, fans tend to notice skilled position people, and that's why somebody like Michelle or even Boston Scott, I also put on there Carlton Agudosi, who's 6'6". So he's the kind of guy who I always call it the airport test. If he's walking in the airport, you turn around, you notice him just because of his frame. So he's going to get some, if you remember Femi Moma back in the day, everybody was so excited about him. That's going to be Carlton Agudosi. Same type of thing. Yeah, I mean, the eyeball is drawn to skill position people. And Joe is just, you know, he's such a hard worker. He's sort of the cliche of the motor never stops. So he's going to get noticed, but you can only get noticed so much playing defensive end.
And your rankings of most physically impressive, where does Dorial Green Beckham fall in that list?
Well, he was. Size wasn't his problem. Let's put it that way. He's had a number of other problems, which you can tell by his arrest record. Right. But he was a heck of a college player and really a college prospect as he ping-ponged from Oklahoma to Missouri. Yeah, I mean, he just had issues that there's a lot of – I mean, Josh Gordon would be at the top of that list. I mean, nobody's more talented at receiver than Josh Gordon, but can't keep his personal life under control. And if you can't be on the field, it doesn't matter how talented you are. I don't think there's any question. At one stage, Dorial Green Beckham could have been an NFL star, but he just didn't have that – he didn't have his life in order.
Yeah, John, the one guy I remember meeting years ago that I was not want to say I was in awe because I'm not that nutty, but I was seriously impressed by his physical makeup was Kenny Britt. Because when I met him in person after college, I'm like, holy cow, this guy is built like an NFL player.
You know, it's funny you say that because I remember the exact time, the first time I was on the field, and I went, and I can't say the word on the radio because of how physically impressive somebody was, and that was Terrell Owens. I just went, oh my God. And there's a lot of players like that now. It tends to be skill position players. And, you know, I mentioned Darren Sproles yesterday when Jeff was on the show, and we talked about his work ethic. I don't think people realize if you were going to say who the strongest Eagle was, and by the way, it's not close, pound for pound, it's Darren Sproles.
Yeah. By
a wide margin. Just the things he can do in the weight room. A lot of the skill position guys are pretty amazing. And you saw the viral stuff with DK Metcalf and what he looks like. Yeah, there's a lot of those wow guys now. Probably because they got 28 supplements.
Right, they have 28 supplements. John McMullen, follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen on Twitter, and check out all of his work on the Eagles and the NFL at 973ESPN.com, also on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. John, we'll be talking to you tomorrow as training camp is finally here.
Finally here. I'm not as excited as some people, but I will be there.
As you always are. John McMullen, every day at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN.